pleasure to welcome you here this afternoon for what I am certain will be a very engaging and a very fascinating discussion. I think we've all seen from the invitation and from the concept note that the discussion we're about to have will hopefully play a part in the ongoing discussions that we need at this particular point, not only in Kenya but in the continent, where so many things that we have taken for granted as the way democracies, the way economies in democracies should work. As some of you may know, the African Leadership Center is a joint initiative of King's College London and here in Kenya, the University of Nairobi. We are a hub, so to speak, incubating the next generation of African leaders in peace, security, and development. So the questions that we are talking about today on political economy of Kenya and perhaps of other African countries, especially some of our research and one of our thematic areas being on state-society dynamics. So we are really pleased to partner with Inuka, to partner with the Elephant, and we thank you so much for choosing us and for being here this afternoon. You're welcome. Please feel very, very free, and we're looking very forward to the discussions. We have some of our fellows of the African Leadership Center here in the room and some of our staff who will also be taking part in this afternoon's conversation.
I was told to speak about the Kenya political economy since 1900 in 20 minutes. I was like, I know I am good in this subject, but I'm not that good. You know, that's totally very different, sort of difficult. I don't know how you condense that. But so what I decided to do, because I have to cover the ground and it's important, is to do a timeline. A very simple timeline of Kenya's political economy, picking out just about 5 or 6 key dates. As we do in economics, we always start by asking yourself, what and social science generally, and I think science, what phenomenon do you want to explain? What are you setting out to explain? In economics, when we get pedantic, we use the term stylized facts. We have some stylized facts, which means observation that we are generally agreed on. So it's useful to put those things out and see whether in fact we are agreed on them. Generally, there are things which we think are true but not precisely. And I think, in my sense, when I was thinking, what are the things we want to explain when we are talking about a sort of theory of political economy of Kenya? One is, in the general public, there is a sense of underachievement of economic in terms of socio-economic development. People feel that Kenya should have done better than it has. Yeah? We also tend very often to compare ourselves with the US on the same level with East Asia and all manner of things. So whether it is factual or not, there is actually a sense of underachievement, and that we are punching way below our weight economically. And we are perturbed by the fact that 50 years after independence, we are still preoccupied with poverty, ignorance, and disease. We don't think that's where we should be. That we still have huge youth unemployment and underemployment and the lack of opportunity. I see quite a lot of frustrations that people think that really, as Kenya, we have the capacity to do better than that. I saw somebody sort of very shocked because they went to Turkana and they said they were very shocked about how it looked. And someone told them, you need to go to a GI and Marsabit and you realize that you've been living a lie about what Kenya actually is. That sort of stuff. Then there is, of course, the class, what we call the Wanyanchi versus Wananchi divide. And of course, the thing with geography in countries like this is contiguous with ethnicity. So the overlap of geography and ethnicity then gives an ethnic dimension to the distribution of grievances. So that's the second thing that we put the sort of stylized fact of our political economy. A third thing is something which is probably not as familiar in its technical description, but it's familiar because it's in a lived manner, is something we call political business cycles. And in layman's language is that we have observed a cycle where the economy is doing well and we're doing well development-wise, and come the election, we have an election crisis of sorts, and that sort of takes the economy down, and then it recovers, and then come next election, you have, so that elections are very disruptive. And this has happened since multi-party. You have election shocks. Now, I have there my first timeline, and it takes us from 1916 or thereabouts to 1950. And what we have there is data on the distribution or racial distribution of income from the arrival of colonialism to 1976. But this data comes from a study by a gentleman called Arne Bigsten. He's a professor of economics in Sweden. And by sheer happenstance, he was actually my PhD examiner. And this actually is from his PhD dissertation, which he did on Kenya many, many years ago, I think in the mid-70s. But the thing I want to strike is that if you look at that black line, that black line shows that, of course, before colonialism, 100% of the income was controlled by natives, isn't it? But then in comes colonization, and this starts from 1914, when I suppose you have data from which you can use from around the end. It's a lot of work which goes into reconstruct data on the economy going back to 1914, even though it looks like a simple thing. And then you see that by 1950, the African share of income has been squeezed to 50%. Yeah? And the European and Asian share, the migrants' share, is obviously the other 50%. If you add the European and Asian, it's obviously 50%. So African share of income is 1950. Now, I want to stop at 1950. So that's why, although the graph was beyond that, you're saying the average income of Asian or European on average is 25 times the average income of Africans. And because you can see the Europeans and Asians are about the same share of income at that point, but in fact the European population is only also just about 0.5%. So you're talking about, again, the average income of a European being about 50 times the average share of income of an African, and about 20 times the average income of an Asian. Now, this scale of redistribution cannot be done by market forces. Market cannot do that because people have the same abilities generally. It's difficult to say that those people's abilities are so superior that they would have been able to just by sheer merit be able to redistribute, to earn that much more than command such a big share of the economy than Africans. The Indian state was established to create a privileged minority. Yeah? It was set up to create and sustain a privileged minority. And the way it did this is not rocket science, or is not things that we do not know. The first thing it did was to expropriate land from Africans and redistribute that land, consolidate it and redistribute it to white settlers. So obviously, if you have taken away land, which is a major factor of production, and given it to these people, that is one of the things. Then the second thing is, in addition to that, is capital. Allocation of capital and finance. So, if you're talking about public capital, you tax Africans and you develop infrastructure for the settler economy. So every African is paying hard tax, but the money is going to build roads and provide agricultural services and all those things, only to white people. Yeah? Then private capital. The banks are collecting deposits from everybody, including Africans, but are only giving credit to white people and Asians. In fact, I think until the 1950s, or probably after independence, a loan to Africans exceeding 200 shillings was not enforceable in law. Africans who were blocked from growing cash crops or keeping European cattle until the 50s. So that was the mechanisms which was used to redistribute incomes. So the question is, what happens in 1950 and why does it start to turn out? Do you have any idea? Can you guess? That was 53. But you're right, it's related. It's Mauma. That's when 1940s, late 40s, that's when the agitation of independence and whatever state of it, the Mauma uprising begins in the late 40s, 1946 about. It escalates. So that in 1953 you have the state of emergency. Yeah? And then immediately after the state of emergency, in 1954, the colonial government starts something called the Swinnerton Plan, which was an agrarian reform thing, which then began to change. So you have this distributional compression. It gets to a point where the Africans say enough is enough, and that forces political change. The political change actually begins immediately after the 1950s. So now I just want to then provide that background. What happened? What do we do after independence? Given that the state that we inherit, that's a legacy in terms of the character of the state. It's an extractive state which was established to create a small privileged and sustain a small privileged elite, economic and political elite, and to protect that status, to protect those people from the masses. Yeah, so the grievances are beginning to grow. That there's something wrong with this structure. We have gotten political independence, but what we've done, we've got just another bunch of people who have captured the same state and they're doing exactly the same thing that the Mzungu was doing with it. They have just occupied and literally, these people just moved out of his lands and moved into Bolega. Streets, they started doing exactly the same thing right away. Then the very same people now, this becomes a problem. In 1971, they respond. Because they get appointed to respond, there is a task force, the Dewa Commission, which is appointed to review public sector salaries. Because what has happened is that because you had apartheid in the public service, where whites got paid more for the same job as Africans. So you are the same, you've got the same job, but if you are a white, you get the higher salary. If you are a nurse, a white nurse gets paid more than an Asian nurse, and an Asian nurse gets paid more than a black nurse, even so they are doing the same job. So they say they need to rationalize this thing, and they appoint the Dewa Commission report, and it does that. What happens is that that releases sort of the safety valve, that opens a safety valve, that otherwise the system was actually going to collapse. Because you do a huge financial and trade liberalization right away. And Juakali explodes. We talk about population growth. These young people are coming, Juakali explode, bazaars take over CBD, people can now buy foreign exchange and go to Dubai and bring Mitumba cars. The economy begins to change, the structure of the economy begins to change very dramatically. Because what has happened is all these controls which had been put up to maintain a small privileged class are now brought down. But you also begin to see a corporatization of the economy. It begins with matatus. Matatus are chased out of town because it was very chaotic. during those last days of Moi, because it was a complete laissez-faire. So matatus begin to chase out of town and they are replaced by city hopper. And of course, the middle class is very happy because now you have sort of an orderly public transport. But they actually don't realize that this is again erecting barriers against the Mwananchi economy and restoring the corporatist economy. So by 2005, there is a sort of major fallout. We have the referendum, the government loses that referendum because we start with wanting to have what we have now, more or less, a progressive constitution. And then you've got the old establishment, rearguard action. In fact, they claw back. They put out a constitutional draft, which was basically just a sort of the old sort of order with a bit of tweaks here and there. But the government so the government collapses. By the time the government was collapsing, we were in the middle of doing a midterm review of the economic recovery strategy. I think the next important timeline is 2010. In 2010, we write a new constitution after the violence and all manner. And now we begin to accept that the myth of Kenyan exceptionalism has now been burst. And we have accepted that we have serious constitutional grievances, and we come up with a thing we call Agenda 4 items. So Agenda 4 items is acknowledgement that which had been denied for a long time. So we write the 2010 Constitution, and in the public finance principles, we write Article 201 of the public finance principles, Article B. We write the following: that the public finance system shall promote an equitable society, and in particular, the burden of taxation shall be shared equally, the revenue restoration shall be shared equitably among national and county governments. But more importantly, B3, we say that expenditure shall promote the equitable development of the country, including by making special provisions for marginalized groups and areas. I don't think many Kenyans have actually ever realized that the purpose of that clause was to remove, to repeal basically the sessional paper number 10 of 1965. Essentially, you say we must make equitable. Remember, they say that the resource allocation will be based on economic potential. Productivity. And the productivity, but whatever you call it. They say it will not be based on that criteria. The resource allocation, public money will be spent to achieve equitable development of the country.
So, what came to me as you were making your presentation, Dr. Ndii, is that if the point of reform began with the Swinnerton Plan, which was bringing in more Africans kind of into the agricultural economy and giving them opportunities in that space, do you see a connection between the early nationalist agitation for independence were very much tied into a demand to be included in the extraction, in a way, to be included in that colonial enterprise, and not necessarily to transform it or to have a different kind of framework, right? And for me, I see that and kind of connecting that with our problem with kind of opposition politics, in that the way people say that, in fact, there's no difference between whoever is in power and the opposition. It's because they all want to eat, right? That demand for inclusion in the extractive activity is intact from that point even up to now, and that is kind of like the fatal flaw of activism, of civic education, of trying to get people engaged more. It's because that logic has never been overturned, that what they wanted was an inclusion in the extractive state and not really to change it in any way.
You talk about where we are and this interesting time that we're talking about. You're talking about Kenya, for instance, is in a space where, in a sense, our elite are stuck. Then how do we navigate through a dark age in an interconnected world?
These questions are partly the reason why we are where we are as a country. I think when people, by people who realize that they are very difficult, the leadership, and therefore they refuse. they sort of sweep them into a corner. So I think one of the things we need to do is start confronting I was having this conversation with one of some of the state house types just last week, trying to explain to them that the problem that we need to solve is political, not development. It's very hard to explain to those people because they are so wedded into this thing. So all the time they are trying to prove themselves. And the thing they try to prove themselves with is development. Because they have no status as leaders, other than as government functionaries.
So is development in this variation of imperialism?
There is dimension of that. But let me say, so that you can move on, let me say something cheeky about your last point. Your previous point about is violence a necessary step? Now, I have asked myself that question, and I was reflecting on looking at African history, post-independence, and I observed something very interesting. That you have two trajectories, post-independence trajectories. One, which starts with countries which have a lot of turbulence in the 60s, and those countries are now moving towards order. And the leadership has not realized that these young people who are educated, who are globally exposed and that kind of thing have different expectations. And I think that's the thing which I sense is playing out. Yeah? And I don't think these African society countries like this one in particular, I think that is the greatest vulnerability of the status quo. That when I listen to this leadership, because I talk to them today, they are completely oblivious of what we are talking about now. They are completely oblivious of it.
How do you think you can actually get out of that debt trap? What is it practically that the youth now who are inheriting that debt, what can they actually do to get out of that trap?
As a political analyst, what recommendation do you suggest in order to work deep down and address the society's problem and challenge?
You know, debt, once you get, even the business, there is a threshold. Once you get beyond a particular point, then the more you get this way, the more difficult it becomes to resolve. But there are three things you can do if you have a debt problem. You can cut your expenditure so that you pay the debt, so you have sacrifice. You have to sacrifice something. You have to get more income, or you have to find a way of reducing the debt burden itself by restructuring the debt. Yeah? Quick answer to the lady. The question of African development and all the development sort of questions. I think what we are talking about here, maybe just to contextualize, this conversation we are having is located in the crisis of the nation state. So it is not about the state doing things. We are saying the state is failing. Why is it failing? So we are asking, how can the state be changed by the citizens? So it's outside of the discourse of effective state capacity to do development. So we are saying the state itself is the problem. The character of the state is the problem. So as society looking at this beast that we have called the state, we are asking what nature of a beast is it? So again, you cannot begin to say, oh, how can the state do more development? The see, part of the problem of the state is that it tries to do development instead of governing. The state elite are preoccupied with development, and that's part of the problem. While in fact they should be preoccupied with governing. But anyway, yeah. And rule of law and other things, yeah.
Is there a way we can move towards citizenship, which means we have both responsibility and rights? And my other thing is this: if a drunkard is driving a bus and you know it's carrying people and you know people will die, would we just write and talk about it? Or would we do some action to get him out of the driver's seat?
How does such a political narrative impact, and even when we look at issues of corruption and the stealing from NYS and the rest, how does it impact on how we view economics and how we organize in terms of, as young people, in terms of economic setups and organizations? Thank you.
I think Tribalism is really a creature of convenience. It is used for ethnic political mobilization. It is partly also a response by communities to predations by the state, because of so it is a very complex animal. And I think in this reimagination we are talking about, I think identity is a very important part of that reimagination. And we have to ask ourselves, what are the really important identities to us? And where should these identities play? Should they play in the cultural space, but also in the political space? And I think if we feel that why can't our state be organized around ethnic constituencies? If that is what people feel are important to say so. So I'm sort of avoiding very much those labels which take us into those conversation around corruption, for instance, which is, I don't think, because those are the problems of the state. That's the problematic of the state we are talking about.
There is what I would call the colonial software. The colonial software whereby we just think like them. The imperialism, just as you've put it. How do we do away with this colonial software to just have a time with ourselves and transform this continent? Thank you.
Thank you. What should higher education institutions be doing? What should the PhDs on this subject area be, not only for Kenya but the rest of the continent?
How do we liberate ourselves from dependence? Intellectual dependency on other people's ideas about what our society should be about. Economic dependency, because we have been persuaded that we are materially deprived and therefore we are miserable. Are we really miserable? Because I grew up without electricity and running water and all these things that have been a big issue. I have no recollection of feeling deprived or poor. So why is it that these things are made to sound like they are such deprivation? And everything must stop, and that is the only subject. We have to go all over the world, Millennium Development Conferences. I think we have, that's the only, is that the measure of people? Is consumption the measure of a man? I'll talk to post-capitalism and then the role of higher education, because I want to end there as the most significant. I think the post-capitalism question is very important entry point to this reimagination, because it is also a leveler. They're saying capitalism is falling apart, and that's a problem for everyone. We don't need technical assistance. Which brings me to the role of higher education institutions, which is the same problem, because I think more fundamentally, those institutions themselves have to deal with the crisis of the democratization of knowledge by technology. In fact, my university did not have university membership card, only a library card. If you had a card at the Bodleian Library, you are a member of the university. So, the university, that physical monopoly of books, and then the academic edifice of publishing, which then becomes the gatekeeper of what is acceptable knowledge or not. And then comes something called the internet and the modem. And you can plug into your computer and access all the books in the world. So if people can access all the books in the world, you can also disseminate your ideas now in a tweet. I think the place of the university in the knowledge space, it becomes more not a question of the role of the universities.
Okay, which means now those at the university have to start asking themselves,
yes,
what are we going to do if everybody is going to run away? So this was supposed to be just an opportunity to have an open conversation. Not so much a lecture where we are all receiving, but a conversation that was precipitated by a discussion of Kenya's political economy. I think you will agree with me that David has really laid out how our past I was going to say, as the way we began as a country, which was really founded on the logic of colonial extraction, and I really also liked that phrase, that we've been running since then on a colonial software. And surely by now we must either accept that there's a virus in the system or that it's time to just upgrade. But something is definitely wrong. I note that Kenya actually marks 55 years of independence at this point. Tomorrow, right? I mean, like from midnight we're celebrating 55 years of independence. So I think that the questions you have put, not just to do with the economy, but what does it mean if you look back into your past and where we are today? What does it mean for the future? I think that is really, really relevant. It was really a joy to hear people from other countries also saying, okay, we hear what you're talking about with Kenya, but how do we then fit ourselves in? What are the lessons we're learning from that? So I really also thank those who spoke from that particular perspective. I really like that we're asking questions, that we're not yet answering them. I felt like there were many questions asked that for me raised more questions. I'm really troubled by that when you talked about your identity and centered ethnicity, and then I was like, okay, hang on a second. Do I do the same thing? And I thought, even when I think of myself now, I don't think ethnicity is the first one. I think my identity as a woman, my identity as an African, I usually say I'm an East African of Kenyan origin. All those things come to mind. And that was very useful for me because you made me ask, but why? When you started to say, this is the logic of why I do it. So I really like that we're asking questions, that you're troubling some of our settled notions. You're making us think differently from where we are right now. I am particularly pleased that we ended at that question of how do we liberate ourselves, this intellectual dependency. I've just come back from a conference, and Africa is celebrating 60 years exactly since the 1958 All Africa People's Conference that happened in Ghana. And one of the things they were talking about was, it was really an occasion. I think 8 African countries were independent. Nkrumah said, we as Ghana, you remember the black star leading Africa? Nkrumah gathered people. The first conference they had in April was the States. And so the presidents gathered, and they were talking very much from a state perspective. But in 1958, in December, he said, no, the people must think about what does the next phase of liberation look like. And if you read Tom Mboya's book, Freedom and After, what Tom Mboya talked about was how so many of the people who were there were not yet. It was the Patrice Lumumbas. It was the, I think, I'm not sure if he said Mobutu, but I think Namibia, the guys who started, even before Nyoma. There were, a whole bunch of them who were just there as people first, who then went on to do states. And the big question that we were asking was, what is the unfinished business of liberation? So I really, really want to thank Joe, Christine, David, but then all of you for everything that you said, for the questions you have asked, for the questions that we have begun, the conversation we have begun to have. I can assure you at the Elephant, we will keep the conversation going, and I'm sure we'll have other events like this.
Maybe just, can we give a warm hand of applause? I get the sense that this was when they thinking about what the Elephant was supposed to be and creating spaces for these kind of conversations that are about liberation. I think we've reached a very good point to take off from this time. I think we're beginning to get there. So one commitment that I can make is the Elephant will continue to host these kind of conversations, not only physically like this, but also online. I think we will be able to do them online now that we have that capacity. We've experimented with quick chats and the like. Everything that has been said here today has been recorded. You've seen the team around. It will be uploaded onto the elephant.info website, so you have access to it. Those of you who came late or missed certain sections, we'll be very grateful for comments, for ideas, for ways that we can improve the engagement, for subjects that we can debate, for spaces that we can engage with, and how we can take these conversations forward. So feel free to go to the website and please share those ideas with us. This is a space that is not, we're not proprietary, we own it all together here. That's why we've convened. So we're very keen for those ideas and comments. And thank you once again to Vai and African Leadership Center for hosting us at this inaugural